All right, Chronological Bible Study, week number 29. All right, and this one, just to kind of let you go ahead and get there, Isaiah 24, 25, 26, 27, those 4 chapters is what we're going to look at this time. Isaiah, this part of Isaiah, it changes, and Isaiah goes into these 4 chapters, and all of this is about end times. Okay? Now, when did Isaiah write this? Well, he got called as a prophet about 740 BC. And where exactly he wrote these in this time period, I don't really know. But if you just take 740, right, to where is that in response to, well, Jesus' time? Well, that's about 740 years before Jesus is born. Okay, that Isaiah is making all of his prophecies and writes this stuff. You move past that to our day, this is 2021. You add that together, you're looking at 2,761 years ago. Isaiah writes this stuff. To kind of put this in perspective. For Isaiah, this stuff today was all future. When you get to Jesus' time, guess what? All the stuff today that we're looking at is still future. You get to John's time, when John's getting to see the unfolding of the book of Revelation, and it's still future for him, just with the book of Revelation. You get to our time in 2021, and guess what? It's still future. Okay? Every bit of this stuff today is still, from our perspective, it's entirely in the future. Okay? This is end times stuff that Isaiah is going to be seeing. So it's known as eschatological. You also hear people talk about the apocalypse. This is that time period. Okay? What is it? It's the final judgment of God as human history winds down. Okay? Now, unlike all the Green New Deal and all this about global warming going to wipe us all out and all that, the problem is God's not going to have that. God's going to deal with it himself. Okay? So this is all end time stuff as history of humans wind down, and even to our perspective right now, this is entirely in the future, every bit of this. Okay, now Isaiah, I don't think is getting I'm not sure how Isaiah gets these 4 chapters. Meaning, I don't know if God's given him a vision into the end times. I don't know if God's just kind of told him the story of what's going to happen, and he writes it. I don't know. I do think if God's allowed him to have a vision of end times, I think it's a very, very small glimpse. It's a very summarized version. He's not getting the depth of the information that somebody like Daniel or John later on with the book of Revelation, he's not getting that. Okay? Why? Well, there's a lot of poetic language in these 4 chapters, and these are 4 chapters, and as much stuff is going to happen, there's just not a lot there, okay, in the scheme of all of this. And I think he doesn't, I'm not sure he realizes the time period that this is talking about. As you look at this and we go through this, especially in chapter 24, what I believe we know as we look into Daniel and as we look into the book of Revelation, I think what we realize is that period is a period of time that you have the tribulation period, it being a 7-year period, and you've got other things involved in there that I don't necessarily think he saw, or if he did, God kept it what he gave us is a very summarized version of it. Okay? These chapters deal with the day of the Lord, okay, which is also known as the last days. It's a time of judgment. Okay? This is the stuff in Revelation. You get to the seals and the bowls. All that happens in this period of time that Isaiah is talking about. The period of the Great Tribulation. You've got that unholy trinity that comes up in the Great Tribulation. Who? You got Satan, you've got the false prophet, and the Antichrist. Okay? All that comes up in that time period. Okay? That this is looking at. You got the Battle of Armageddon. You've got that 1,000-year reign of Christ on the throne, on the earth. At the same time, during that same period, Satan has been bound and put into the bottomless pit. He's been bound for the 1,000 years, but he's also, at the end of the 1,000 years, Revelation says he's going to be released for a short period of time. And then what happens? Then you've got the final judgment where Satan and all of those are going to be what? Put into hell, permanently closed up, sealed up. It's a done deal. Okay? And then you have also the time of the new heaven and new earth and the new Jerusalem. Okay? All of that a majority of the book of Revelation is written about, he's writing about in these four little chapters. That's the reason I said, I don't know if he got a big picture of what was going on or if he just got a summary. But that's what we have to look with on his. Which means I'm going to fight the temptation to not get too deep in all those other things. Why? Because I know we're going to eventually come into the book of Daniel when we're reading this. We're eventually going to get into Revelation. We'll even eventually get into some of the stuff that Jesus says about these times. Okay? So we're going to resist the temptation, at least for the recording purposes, to get too far into this stuff. Now, bottom line, in summary of the opening here, the bottom line is this: God's patience will not last forever. Okay? There is a date that's been set in ages past, and you and I don't know when the date is. Okay? I think the date's close. You know what? We're really close. Because when this was written 2,700 years ago, and then you get to, well, even in Jesus' time in the first century church, they thought any minute the Lord could come back and all this stuff could take place. So by default, we're closer to the end than they are, right? So from the time of this, from the time of Jesus, we are definitely thousands of years closer to the end times. But doesn't change the fact that one of these days, when we least expect it, the date's going to hit. God's already got set. Okay? Now, Isaiah chapter 24. Verse 1. Look, the Lord is stripping the earth bare and making it desolate. He will twist its surface and scatter its inhabitants. The world order, God is going to judge. Okay? We know when we look into other information like the book of Revelation and stuff, that that's not just going to be one day, boom, it's over. Okay? It's going to unfold. Okay? But the Lord's going to do it. And then verse 2, people and priests alike, servants and masters, female servant and mistress, buyer and seller, lender and borrower, creditor and debtor. These are all what? Basically opposites of each other, right? What's it really saying? It doesn't matter your social classification. It doesn't matter your position in the hierarchy of government or anywhere else, business, how much money you have or don't have. It matters not. Okay? That position, that spot, that power, that money won't save you in that day. Okay? Doesn't matter. The earth will be stripped completely bare and will be totally plundered, for the Lord has spoken this message. The Lord spoke it. It's a done deal. Okay? We don't know the date, but the date's not going to change. Okay? It's a done. Even though it hadn't happened yet, it's off into the future. And look, we don't have a clue about what tomorrow's going to bring. We're not even sure what's going to happen in the next 2 hours. Okay? But God's already said, this is so far in the future from when Isaiah does it, but here it is. It's a done deal. The date's set. God has spoken its message. Human history will expire at some point in time. Okay? Regardless of what they want to talk about, global warming or anything else, God will be the one that will decide when it stops. Verse 4, the earth mourns and withers, the world wastes away and withers. The exalted people of the earth waste away. The earth is polluted by its inhabitants, for they have transgressed his teaching, overstepped his decrees, and broken the permanent covenant. And you can go all the way back. From when? You can get back to the garden, Adam and Eve. God gave a command and they did what? They broke it. And then what happened throughout human history? It got worse and farther from God and farther from what he wanted until God what? Eventually wipes it out with a flood. Okay? And then he what? He took and let a family, one family who were by default human, by default sinners, and they floated across, right? And then afterwards he starts back over, but he starts back over with what? Sinful human beings right over again, starting over again. Okay? And then over time, what's happened? People quickly turned to idolatry, turned away from the Lord, and they moved forward from a human perspective, my desires, my wants, and they got farther and farther from God, and they polluted it all. Verse 6, therefore a curse has consumed the earth, and its inhabitants, they have become guilty. And the earth's inhabitants have been burned, only a few survive. Burned. See, God told Noah in Genesis chapter 9, after the flood, he would never destroy the earth by what?
Water.
By water again. Okay? But in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 6 and 7, through these the world that time perished when it was flooded. By the same word, the present heavens and earth are stored up for fire, being kept for the day of judgment and destruction of the ungodly. God's not going to destroy it again by what? Water. Next time it's going to be what? Fire. Okay? So this is what? End times. By default, we're still here, so it ain't burned up yet, right? But it will. Okay? Only a few survive. What does that mean exactly? Because if God's going to wipe it all out and everything's going to be destroyed, you can't have a few survive, right? Well, I think, again, remember, I don't think Isaiah's getting a full detailed play-by-play, lined out, chronological order what's going to take place. He's getting a summary. Okay? Only a few are going to survive. What does the Bible tell us? That the path of the unrighteous is what? It's wide, right? And how many get on that path? Most. The path that's narrow, how many? Few. The few will what? I think this is the saved that he's really talking about. The rest is going to be destroyed and burned up. Okay? And I think that this is probably what this is talking about, is those that are on the narrow path, those that are ultimately saved. In the scheme of all the people on the earth that have ever existed on the earth, when you look at it over the course of time, those that are going to be saved are going to be what? Relatively small in number, okay? Compared to the vastness of all of the multi-billions of people who at one point in time, across the corridor of time, have existed on the earth. Okay? But eventually, it's going to be burned up and destroyed. Okay? Verse 7, the new wine mourns, and the vine withers. All the carousers now groan. The joyful tambourines have ceased. The noise of the jubilant has stopped. The joyful lyre has ceased. They no longer sing and drink wine. Beer is bitter to those who drink it. I think that this is kind of a picture into probably that Great Tribulation time period. See, what does it tell us? I mean, that when we get to the end times, it's going to happen when nobody's going to be expecting it. Everybody's going to be given in marriage, and they're going to be going to their football games, their concerts. Okay, the lyre and the Music's going to be playing. Everybody's going to be going on with life. They're going to be doing their thing. Hey, look, everything's good. We're good. Life's good. We've got all of this going on. Everything that carousing, that partying, that party lifestyle, going out, drinking, carousing, all those type of things that they had been doing, all of a sudden are going to come to a what? A screeching halt. Okay? Why? You've entered into the what? The Great Tribulation period. When all that stuff's going to come to a stop. Okay? When those seals and those bowls, all that stuff starts to happen, okay? Everything's going to change. Okay? And then it says, verse 10, the city of chaos is shattered. Every house is closed to entry. Some versions call it the wasted city. It's not like this isn't Memphis or Moscow or Beijing or, it's not Jerusalem. It's not Baghdad. It's not one city. This is talking about what? The whole world system. Okay? God Himself's going to violently dismantle the evil world system. Okay? And that's what this is talking about, that city of chaos. God's going to have dismantled that world order, okay, that is there. In the streets they cry for wine, all joy grows dark, earth's rejoicing goes into exile. Only desolation remains in the city. Its gates have collapsed in ruins. For this is how it will be on the earth among the nations, like a harvested olive tree, like gleaning after a great harvest. If you take and know what we know now about, God gives us about the Great Tribulation, as He pours this stuff out, it's going to get worse. Every one of those things get worse and worse and worse. It's kind of like in Egypt, when God dealt with Egypt back in Exodus. Every one of them got worse and worse and worse. Okay? And depending on the numbers, when you get into the Great Tribulation period, you're talking multiple billions of people that will, over this period of time, will die as that takes place. Okay? Everything, God's what? God's bringing all the judgment of all time onto the earth. Okay? But then verse 14 sticks out. 14, 15, and 16. They raise their voices, they sing out. They proclaim in the west the majesty of the Lord. Therefore, in the east, honor the Lord. In the coast and islands of the west, honor the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. From the ends of the earth, we hear songs, the splendor of the righteous one. In the middle of all this, there's what? There's what? Singing and praise to who? The God of heaven. Okay? I think these are the voices of the saved. Okay? These are the ones that are longing for the day of God's reign. I think possibly this is those that are in the 1,000-year reign. Again, Isaiah's not he's seeing the big picture. But when Christ is on the throne during the 1,000-year reign, there's going to be peace on the earth. There's going to be worldwide worship. Okay? And so I think that that's possible that this could be what? Those people that are in the 1,000 years of Christ on the earth. Okay? But then the rest of verse 16. But I said, I waste away, woe is me. Some of them say misery, misery. Why? He knows enough. There's going to be, there's some that have followed the Lord, and there's what? There's worship and praise and eagerness for God. But then he sees what? How bad the destruction and what God's going to do to the world at the end times in judgment. And he says, woe. Okay? Woe. Jesus talks about these times in Matthew 24, 21, and 22. It says this, For at that time there will be great distress, the kind that hasn't taken place from the beginning of the world until now and never will again. Unless those days were cut short, no one would be saved. But those days will be cut short because of the elect. When you get to the end times, you get to the Great Tribulation, if God hadn't cut that short, eventually it'd have wiped everybody out. Okay? So Jesus is pointing to what? End times. Okay? And so Isaiah is at least seeing a piece of it. He's saying, whoa. The treacherous acts of treachery, the treacherous deal very treacherously. And then verse 17 says this, panic, pit, and trap await you who dwell on the earth. Again, I think this is in the time of the Great Tribulation that this is looking at. Panic, first of all. See, everybody thinks, I'm good right now. But what does the Bible tell us as Christians over and over and over again about fear? Don't fear, right? The world thinks, hey, everything's good. But one of these days, when they see all of this stuff to unfold, the God of the universe starts to judge. And the Bible tells us that panic and fear will grip the world. It will be a time, as Jesus said, like it's never happened before. Okay? There'll be fear, there'll be panic on the earth. And then the pit. What's the pit? Well, the pit kind of represents death. They're going to have this fear of what? Of death over them at all times. Great Tribulation, when you read that stuff, it don't sound very pretty. Okay? And then the trap. Trap awaits you. Matthew 24, again, verse 4, Jesus says this, watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name saying, I am the Messiah, and will deceive many. It'll be a trap. So you get to the time of the Great Tribulation, and what's going to happen? Chaos, panic, fear. God's judging the earth, and what will give rise? You will, if you get through the fear and you get through the pit, you end up being what? Deceived by the one that's going to trick you. Who's that? The Antichrist. Okay? You're going to be sucked in. People are going to be sucked into it. So he's saying, make sure no one deceives you. Then he says, whoever flees at the sound of panic will fall into a pit. Fear makes you run, and they're going to end up what? Fall into a pit. And then if you escape the pit, you'll be caught in the trap. Oh. Why? Satan's a great deceiver. He's had about 6,000 plus years to perfect that. And look, y'all live in the same world I do these days, don't you? Yes. People are easily deceived. Okay? Easily deceived. For the windows on high are opened and the foundations of the earth are shaken. The earth is completely devastated. The earth is split open. The earth is violently shaken. The earth staggers like a drunkard and sways like a hut. Earth's rebellion weighs it down and it falls never to rise again. One of these days it will what? Burn up. Okay? And this old world will never rise again. Okay? And then he says this, on that day the Lord will punish the army of the heights and the kings of the ground on the ground. I kind of think this is probably referring to Armageddon, when he brings in all those armies of the world. Okay? Which then leads to the 1,000-year reign. Okay? Again, I don't want to get too far down into the book of Revelation, but kind of trying to plug some gaps here, right? They will be gathered together like prisoners in a pit. They will be confined to a dungeon. After many days, they will be punished. I think this is probably talking about that time of the 1,000-year reign when Satan and them are going to be off into the pit. And it does say that they're going to be let go for just a little while. Okay? But it could mean the final judgment. They're going to be locked away, but they will be gathered together. Okay? The moon will be put to shame and the sun disgraced, because the Lord of armies will reign as king on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. He will display his glory in the presence of the elders. I believe, again, this is probably the 1,000-year reign when Christ will sit on the throne for the 1,000 years. There'll be peace on the earth. By the way, because of this, when Christ is king on the earth, there'll be peace all over the earth. Okay? Which is one reason why I don't believe when we talked about Melchizedek in Abraham's time, he was the king of Salem. Okay? But I don't believe, as some do, that he was Christ, the pre-incarnate Christ. Why? Because when Jesus is on the earth as king, the whole earth is going to be at peace. And the whole earth, not even the whole general area, was in peace when Melchizedek was there. Okay? But I believe that this is probably related. It could be the King of Kings on the throne, final judgment, everything's done. But I think it's probably more related to the 1,000-year reign. Okay. Then chapter 25. Lord, you are my God. I will exalt you. I will praise your name. For you have accomplished wonders, plans formed long ago with perfect faithfulness. How long ago? Long ago. Again, if God can give us the details and tell us about this, at this point it's been 2,700 and about 60 years. Okay? And he said this 2,760 years ago, and said all this. How far back did he have to go to figure all this out? It was a set deal. Okay? God set the plan. It's in place. Okay? It's a done deal, even though it hasn't happened yet. For you have turned the city into a pile of rocks, a fortified city into ruins. The fortress of barbarians is no longer a city. It will never be rebuilt. Okay? When you go through that whole end time stuff, you get to it. God's going to wipe it out. It won't ever be rebuilt. It'll be a done deal. It's all going to go, going to be burned up, it's going to be done. Okay? When God concludes it, it's a done deal. Okay? Therefore, a strong people will honor you. The cities of violent nations will fear you. You know, people always talk about, I won't fear the Lord, I'll never bow down, I don't believe in all that stuff. Doesn't really matter what you believe or think. One of these days, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. Okay? For you have been a stronghold for the poor person, a stronghold for the needy in distress. The world system won't be rebuilt. God will be on the throne. A refuge from the storm and a shade from the heat. When the breath of the violent is like a storm against a wall, like a heat in dry land, you will subdue the uproar of the barbarians. As the shade of a cloud cools the heat of the day, so will silence the song of the violent. I like silence. Most people don't. I love silence. I'm okay riding around without the radio on. I don't have to have something on all the time. I don't have to have white noise going in the background. I don't have to have any. I don't have to have the fan on. I don't have to have none of that stuff. Right? I do. I just like silence. But, you know, sometimes silence can be eerie, right? Mm-hmm. But if everything's just right and it's silent, it's what? It's peaceful, isn't it? Yes. Which is why a lot of people don't like it, because peaceful means you got to get and think and stuff, and that's not always a good spot to be. But the earth has been in turmoil since Genesis chapter 3. Not a little bit in turmoil. Think of all the bloodshed that's happened throughout the course of time. Not just wars, but murders and just you name it. How about all the violence done to people groups across the corridor of time? Of individuals. All the things that have been done. All the thefts, all the murders, you name it. All those things. The earth has been in a massive uproar. And we live in the United States, and it's relatively peaceful. Now, there are parts of the city you don't want to go in at night, right? And these days lately, it's become a constant thing. People getting shot on the interstate. Okay? But there will be a time when what? God will rule, all that will be destroyed, and the earth will what? Sit in silence, I think, in peace. Because why? God's got it all handled. God's in control. Okay? God's in control. It's a peaceful silence. On this mountain, the Lord of armies will prepare for all the peoples a feast of choice meat, a feast of aged wine and prime cuts of choice meat, fine vintage wine, Sounds like a what? A nice feast dinner, doesn't it? I think it sounds probably like the marriage supper of the Lamb in the book of Revelation. See, all that's going to take place. Why? When the Great Tribulation's going on, those of us that are what? Been caught up with the Lord are going to be what? We're going to be having a feast with the Lamb. While all the rest of this stuff's going to be where? On this earth going on. Okay? On this mountain he will destroy the burial shroud, the shroud over all the peoples, the sheet of covering all the nations. He's going to destroy the burial shroud. What do you use a burial shroud for? Bury people when they're dead, right? And then it says this, he will destroy death forever. The Lord God will wipe away the tears from every face and remove his people's disgrace from the whole earth, for the Lord has spoken. Does that sound like anything? Let's go to 1 Corinthians first. 1 Corinthians 15:54. When this corruptible body is clothed with incorruptibility, and this mortal body is clothed with immortality, then the saying that is written will take place: death has been swallowed up in victory. Paul's what? Paul's going back to what? Quoting this. Then you have Revelation 19:9. He said to me, write, blessed be those invited to the marriage of the feast of the Lamb. Okay? That's Revelation 19. You get real close to the end there. It's 22 chapters. You're at 19. You're talking about what? The marriage supper of the Lamb. Okay? So I think this is talking about the marriage supper of the Lamb, this section. And then, verse 9, on that day it will be said, look, this is our God. We have waited for him, and he has saved us. This is the Lord. We have waited for him. Let us rejoice and be glad in his salvation, for the Lord's power will rest on this mountain. They waited on God's salvation. For what? The people. And the people are waiting on what? The righteous rule of the King of Kings. Because the earth has not been ruled righteously since the beginning of time. And all creation groans. But Moab will be trampled in his place as straw is trampled in a dung pile. He will spread out his arms in the middle of it as a swimmer spreads out his arms to swim. His pride will be brought low along with the trickery of his hands. I think this is really just talking about mankind. Okay? And the high-walled fortresses will be brought down, thrown to the ground, to dust. Okay? God's in control. There is a day coming. Okay? There is an end times that are coming. And then chapter 26, on this day, this song will be sung in the land of Judah. We've gone back and we're now what? Picked up Judah again. You know? And Paul makes it clear in the book of Romans, God ain't finished with the Jewish people. Okay? And if you go to end time stuff in Revelation, God ain't finished with them. And guess what? They didn't exist as a people group or as a nation until 1948. 47, 48, something. Okay. But they're back as a people group. But here they are. Verse 2, open the gates so a righteous nation can come in, one that remains faithful. But they didn't remain faithful throughout their history in the Old Testament, did they? But guess what? God never gave up on them. Okay? He punished them pretty hard, but he never gave up on them. Why wouldn't he do that? Because God made another promise. You got to go back a whole lot of years before Isaiah, and you go all the way back to who? Abraham. Okay? Then it go through you, Abraham. Okay? Through you. Verse 4, trust in the Lord forever because in the Lord himself is an everlasting rock, or rock of ages. Okay? For he has humbled those who live in lofty places in an inaccessible city. He brings it down to the ground. He throws it to the dust. Feet trample it, the feet of the humble, the steps of the poor. God himself will rule justly. One of these days, he's going to set it all correctly and all right. Okay? And then verse 7, the path of the righteous is level. You clear a straight path for the righteous. People that do things according to God's standards, they don't what? They don't manipulate stuff. It's a righteous path. Yes, Lord, we wait for you in the path of your judgments. Our desire is for your name and your renown. I mean, to me, this was great encouragement when you think about it. God's in control, and we do what? We wait on him. And again, like I talked the other day, can you do anything about world politics?
No.
Not a thing. Can you do anything about the world economy?
No.
No. But God can. We wait on him. It's in his hands. Okay? We wait in your path for your judgments. And then verse 9 says, I long for you in the night. Yes, my spirit within me diligently seeks you. I wrote in here, do we? In the night, do we long for God? There'll be a day we will. He's looking at it. Okay? Do we long to walk righteously with God? Righteously with God. Okay? Diligently seek you, for when your judgments are in the land, the inhabitants of the world will learn righteousness. Skip down to verse 19. It says, your dead will live, their bodies will rise. That sounds like a what? A resurrection, doesn't it? Has that happened yet? So we're still where? We're still off in the future, aren't we? Resurrection, those in Christ. Okay. Awake and sing, you who dwell in the dust, for you will be covered with the morning dew, and the earth will bring out departed spirits. One of these days, those that are what? Dead in Christ will what? Be reunited. With not the corruptible body, but the what? Jesus said it earlier, with the incorruptible body. Okay? I don't know about y'all, but it'd be kind of nice to have that body.
Yeah.
Okay? Not only will it not wear out, but it also won't be prone to what? Sin. It'd be kind of nice. Some of those strongholds we have, things that get after us, things we screw up, get all tied up in. It'd be kind of nice to have that stuff go away, wouldn't it? One of these days we're going to be what? We're going to be reunited with our body and what? To the incorruptible body. Okay. This is talking about resurrection. And then chapter 27, verse 1 right there. On that day the Lord, with his relentless, large, strong sword, will bring judgment on Leviathan, the fleeing serpent. Who's the serpent? Satan. Okay. Leviathan, the twisting serpent. Twisting and manipulating everything. Okay. And he will slay the monster that is in the sea. Revelation 20, verses 1 through 3 says this. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding the key to the abyss and a great chain in his hand. He seized the dragon, the ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, threw him into the abyss, closed it, put a seal on it, so that he would no longer deceive the nations until the 1,000 years were completed. After that, he must be released for a short time. Okay? That's what we're talking about here. Okay? Again, he's going 1,000 years, he's going to be over there. He's going to get out for a little bit, but then he's going to go back permanently. Okay? And then also, same chapter, but verse 10, Revelation 20, verse 10 says this. The devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet are, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. And ever and ever. How long is that?
Forever.
Forever. Okay. Never getting out. And all of those who don't join in for the marriage supper of the Lamb are going to be where?
There with them.
Right there with them. And it's got to be a pretty bad place for God to even take some people that you just know deserve punishment and still gives them opportunity to get saved. Must know how bad hell is. Okay. Verse 12. On that day the Lord will thresh grain from the Euphrates River as far as the Wadi of Egypt, and you Israelites will be gathered back one by one. On that day a great trumpet will be blown, and those lost in the land of Assyria will come, as well as those dispersed in the land of Egypt, and they will worship the Lord at Jerusalem on the holy mountains. Again, God's not finished with Israel. Okay? No matter what people may wish, God's not finished with them. But at the same time, there's going to be what? Where's this? I think this is bouncing back to, Revelation 21, 22, the new heaven and new earth and new Jerusalem that he's looking into and seeing. God promised Abraham that this was an eternal promise. Okay? All nations would be blessed. Okay? But God also said, I'm not through with Israel. Okay? New heaven and new earth. Now, conclusion. In the unrighteous world that we live in, this to me gave me strength when I kind of started studying over this the other day. You know, why? Because in a time where evil's called good, good's called evil. And by the way, if you want to find that out, all you got to do is go out there and say something's wrong, and what? Everybody will jump all over you because, evil now is considered good. Okay? Illicit sex, mobs, violence, murder, distortions, injustice, wars, rumors of wars, natural disasters, earthquakes, hurricanes, godlessness rules supreme. But here's the thing, we know that the God of the universe is in what? In complete control. How do we know that? Because he was able to tell us about it 2,700 years ago, and he had it set up way before that. And where did he start this whole process? Well, really, for us, as far as time, Genesis chapter 3, when God promised there would be one day that would do what to the serpent? Crush his head. This is a summary of what John revealed to us in the book of Revelation. And I think John gave us a very, very, very summarized version of what those 7 years plus the 1,000-year reign plus the after really going to be like. Okay? I don't know about y'all. It's kind of good to know that in all the chaos, God's in control. Because you and I can't control one single thing out there. Okay? And it's kind of nice to know that even Isaiah talks about, you know what? It's peaceful knowing we long for the day God will do what? Rule everything justly. But we also know that one of these days judgment's coming. You know? And at the same time, we wish for that. Why? Because, the holiness of God is not being followed. It's an attack against what? God's holiness, the way human beings live. And one of these days, God's going to deal with it. One of these days. Okay? Thanks.